In the fall of 1940, at the Willys Overland facility in Toledo, Ohio, a daunting challenge had been met head-on. Within a mere 75 days, the team's engineers had conceived, constructed, and supplied 2 experimental models to the U.S. Army. Dubbed the Quad due to its 4-wheel drive setup, this compact, angular, and practical machine gave no hint of its future status as a legendary asset in wartime fleets. Remarkably, just 4 years later, Nazi commanders would endanger themselves to seize these rugged contraptions, valuing them more than almost any other U.S. gear and conceding that America had engineered a marvel beyond the reach of their own experts. The tale unfolds not from victory, but from doubt. When images of the initial U.S. Jeep models arrived at German spy desks toward the end of 1941, the verdict was scornful. The design struck them as rudimentary. Doors were absent, the front glass folded down entirely. Its frame consisted of basic stamped steel panels with visible fasteners and scant shielding against weather. For those in the Wehrmacht who had invested years in crafting the Volkswagen Kubelwagen, this Yankee invention appeared downright crude. An early 1942 Intel assessment labeled it as slapdash in construction, missing the refined mechanics befitting a contemporary war machine. The Axis forces trusted their lightweight transports implicitly. The Kubelwagen, penned by Ferdinand Porsche and rooted in the affordable car pushed by Hitler, weighed less than the nascent Jeeps, featured a smooth belly that glided over hurdles, and, despite rear-wheel drive only, excelled in trials. Teutonic innovators were convinced their method outshone others. What need was there for intricate all-wheel propulsion when smart design delivered comparable performance with simpler guts? Such arrogance would soon unravel disastrously. Far from a rushed patchwork, the U.S. Jeep arose from fierce rivalry, grueling evaluations, and merciless tweaks. Back in June 1940, the Army unleashed one of the toughest calls for bids in car-making lore. They sought a 1.4-ton scout vehicle, able to haul 3 soldiers plus gear, conquer any landscape off-road, prove easy for novices to handle, endure battlefield punishment, and stay light enough for a quartet of troops to hoist if mired. The requirements were unforgivingly precise. Wheelbase capped at 80 inches, overall height limited to 40 inches, curb weight below 300 pounds, all-wheel drive to scale a 60% incline, fording depth up to 18 inches of water. The timeline for the debut prototype was merciless too, 49 days from signing to a functional unit. Nearly all automakers balked at entering. Only 3 dared: the modest American Bantam Car Company from Butler, Pennsylvania, known for tiny autos, which stunned observers by unveiling its operational prototype right on time, the Blitz Buggy, on September 23, 1940. It shone in preliminary runs, yet officials worried about Bantam's output potential. A firm that churned out just 200 units in 1939, could it scale to produce thousands for the front? So the military brought in 2 giants to review the Bantam blueprint and offer alternatives. Both Willys Overland in Toledo, Ohio, and Ford Motor Company scrutinized it closely, then crafted enhanced iterations. This sparked a trio of rivals, each boasting unique advantages, subjected to relentless trials through the waning months of 1940 and into 1941. Bantam had laid the foundational shape. Willys supplied the robust Go Devil power plant, yielding 60 horsepower. Ford polished the chassis with the signature-level grille and built-in lamps. By July 1941, the Army rendered its choice. Willys Overland took the lead role, blending top elements from every contender. Ford would manufacture matching units per the identical blueprint. The unified 1.4-ton scout truck, branded the Willys MB and Ford GPW, rolled into mass assembly in November 1941, mere weeks ahead of the Pearl Harbor strike. Pouring out of plants in Toledo and Detroit came a creation that redefined mobility. The MB and GPW matched specs precisely: 132 inches long, 62 inches wide, 72 inches tall with glass raised, and 260 pounds heavy. The Go Devil mill, at 134 cubic inches, generated 60 horsepower at 4,000 RPM. It hit nearly 60 minutes on pavement, and 8.34-inch ride height let it conquer rough ground that halted standard rides. The all-wheel setup via a dual-gear transfer unit shifted via straightforward pedals. Astonishingly, it required only everyday implements for on-site repairs. The power plant prioritized endurance above. The Jeep's engine prioritized rugged dependability over fine engineering. Unlike the tighter specs in commercial motors, its broader clearances enhanced durability amid battlefield rigors. Components swapped seamlessly across Willys and Ford assembly lines. A field technician could pull pieces from one unit to fix another without issue. The moniker captured the machine's adaptability. Though origins spark ongoing discussion, experts largely trace Jeep to the spoken version of GP, Army code for general purpose or government purchase. Troops evaluating initial models in 1941 started dubbing them Jeeps, perhaps drawing from Eugene the Jeep, a Popeye cartoon figure famed for navigating any terrain and tackling any task. The term endured. In February 1941, a Washington Daily News reporter hopped into an early factory model and inquired about its designation. The operator quipped, "It's a Jeep." The story spread across the country. Willys saw the branding value and secured the trademark in 1943, even as GIs had casually adopted it for 2 years prior. Army Chief of Staff General George Marshall hailed the Jeep as America's top innovation for contemporary combat, covering U.S. units from North Africa through Sicily, Italy, France, and the Pacific. War reporter Ernie Pyle described it as loyal like a hound, tough like a donkey, and nimble like a kid. It handled every job and traversed every path. Such praise emerged in time, however. During early 1942, as initial Jeeps reached frontline areas, Wehrmacht spies clung to their doubts. The debut clashes pitting Axis troops against U.S. Jeeps unfolded in North Africa toward the end of 1942. Operation Torch, the Allies' assault on Vichy-held North Africa, marked the first head-to-head with enemy forces. Countless Jeeps hit the beaches alongside the assault teams. Rommel's and Italian ranks finally inspected up close the rigs that U.S. plants had churned out en masse. Early Axis evaluations offered a split verdict. Seized intel summaries from spring 1943 praised the Jeep's quickness and off-road prowess, yet faulted its thirst for fuel, scant shielding, and exposure to explosives and gunfire. A dispatch highlighted how Yanks appeared to squander endless supplies of these contraptions, implying excess rather than strategic need. Observers contended the Kübelwagen matched that agility using just half the output and basic guts. At Axis command posts in Tunisia, staff poring over their initial prize Jeep in January 1943 spotted plenty of flaws. Mud and grit could wreck the open motor bay. The fabric roof offered zero safeguard against fragments or bullets. Positioning the gas tank right under the operator's perch struck as a deadly oversight. Its basic 3-gear setup fell short of Teutonic engineering finesse, yet certain findings raised alarms. The power-to-mass balance stood out. Just 60 horses propelled a mere 2,000 pounds, outpacing nearly every Axis scout car in sprints. The all-terrain setup, activated via basic dashboard shifts, performed without hitch even in loose dunes. Most unsettling, the grasp that Yanks manufactured these at a baffling clip. Intercepted records showed output stats that Intel brass first waved off as hype. Per those files, Willys and Ford cranked out Jeeps at 1 per 90 seconds in high gear, 1 per 90 seconds. Spooks ran the math again and again, convinced of a mix-up in the docks. None existed. Come spring 1943, U.S. plants had already rolled off more than 127,000 units. Total Axis light utility output hovered under 50,000. The fallout hit hard. Such output from American mills for scouts hinted at overwhelming might in heavies, guns, and planes. Initial accounts of Wehrmacht hunters targeting U.S. Jeeps surfaced from Tunisia in March 1943. Post-Kasserine Pass skirmish, where Axis had briefly routed the newcomers, pulling back panzer groups hauled off every working rig in sight. Debrief notes from brass stressed how the seized Yank autos excelled in scouting and leadership roles. Clarity grew as the desert fight dragged on. Tunisia's landscape mixed jagged ridges, sandy gullies, and battered shorelines. Axis rides faltered. The Kübelwagen, for all its smarts, couldn't haul loads up sheer inclines. Its back-end propulsion, fine on parade fields, crumbled under real war pressures where velocity equaled life. Bulkier Axis vehicles guzzled valuable fuel at levels that overwhelmed the already burdened supply chains. In comparison, the American Jeep appeared tailor-made for such harsh environments. Its robust motor hauled it up inclines that halted Kübelwagens in their tracks. The four-wheel drive mechanism ensured grip on sandy or muddy surfaces, where rear-wheel drive options merely skidded uselessly. Above all, seized Jeeps offered a boon absent in German machinery: plentiful replacement parts. U.S. supply operations were remarkably streamlined, with repair stations stocked full of substitute pieces. Mechanics from Germany discovered they could sustain captured Jeeps endlessly just by scavenging from Allied storage sites. Ober Wolfgang Müller, who led a scouting unit in Tunisia, recorded in his diary during April 1943 that his troops had seized 6 American Jeeps and swiftly integrated them into operations. After just 2 weeks, he petitioned to swap out all his German rides for the captured American gear. These Jeeps proved quicker, sturdier, and simpler to service than the originals in his fleet. When authorities rejected the proposal over worries about fuel, he remarked sourly that his Kübelwagens burned almost the same amount of gas yet traversed only half the ground. The downfall of Axis troops in North Africa arrived in May 1943, as Jürgen Phönim capitulated on May 13th. Around 250,000 troops from Germany and Italy fell into Allied hands. Left behind or wrecked in the chaos were hundreds of American Jeeps that German squads had been using. When Allied analysts inventoried the discarded Axis hardware, they were taken aback to spot numerous of their own rides amid the enemy garages. Questioning of detained German commanders uncovered a clear trend. Faced with selecting between a German Kübelwagen and a taken American Jeep, leaders nearly always favored the Jeep. Certain outfits had run captured U.S. vehicles for months on end. Service logs indicated these machines frequently racked up more runtime than their German counterparts. The fuel drain mattered little amid the crumbling German supply network. In any case, by June 1943, dispatches from North Africa had arrived at the German headquarters in Berlin. The insights were troubling. U.S. manufacturing output churned out vehicles in volumes Germany couldn't hope to rival. What started as the Jeep being shrugged off as basic turned out to be clearly better suited for scouting and lightweight hauling duties. Wehrmacht forces were eagerly hunting down and adopting faux hardware, highlighting flaws in their own transports. A few German leaders urged speeding up the rollout of four-wheel drive versions of the Kübelwagen. Others argued that Germany simply lacked the muscle to match American output and ought to prioritize strengths in fields like robust tanks and cannons where German design shone. The discussion lost relevance soon enough. Come mid-1943, German factories were barely holding steady on any vehicle output amid escalating Allied airstrikes. Launching a fresh four-wheel drive compact design was out of the question. The Reich would need to make do with existing stocks. At the same time, Jeep output in the States ramped up steadily. By late 1943, the cumulative total surpassed 360,000 units. Assembly lines had reached peak proficiency. At the Willys facility in Toledo, staff could put together a full Jeep from basic materials in under 3 hours. Components came from plants spread over 32 states, then forwarded to Toledo or Ford sites in Dallas and Louisville for completion. Uniformity was total, so elements from one spot meshed with any build. A carburetor made in Wisconsin slotted right into a Jeep finalized in Kentucky. This swappability, paired with huge output scales, forged a supply edge without parallel in warfare annals. Any field Jeep could get fixes from whatever depot was handy. Contrast that with German setups, where varied models demanded exact matches from particular makers, spawning headaches for quartermasters juggling mixed fleets. Shifts in how Germans viewed the Jeep sharpened intensely following the Allied landing in Italy that September 1943. U.S. and British troops hitting Salerno shores in the first assaults unloaded thousands of Jeeps right away. Defenders in Italy faced the longest close-up look yet at American motorization. Amid the rugged hills of southern Italy, with rudimentary paths and savage landscapes, the Jeep's edges turned decisive. As German lines tried to dig in, they lagged behind U.S. scouts in Jeeps that conquered goat paths beyond the reach of bulkier rigs. Surprise-based German pushes discovered American squads in Jeeps, proving nearly impossible to outflank. It wasn't unexpected that Jeep-equipped patrols delivered ongoing updates on German troop activities. Each U.S. infantry regiment typically received around 145 Jeeps for use. This gave American leaders a level of maneuverability and adaptability that their German counterparts envied deeply. A German regimental leader might rely on just a few staff automobiles and bikes. In contrast, his U.S. equivalent commanded an armada of Jeeps capable of swiftly shifting personnel, removing casualties, transporting provisions, and enabling on-the-move coordination. German medical staff, upon examining injured POWs, were especially struck by the evacuation efficiency. U.S. Jeeps could easily transform into makeshift ambulances by securing stretchers over the back benches. As a result, hurt troops arrived at aid stations mere moments after injury, boosting chances of recovery markedly. Wounded Germans, however, endured prolonged trips across bumpy paths in standard vans. The gap in outcomes was evident in the data. Interrogated German health workers expressed astonishment at the rapid care American casualties got, ferried swiftly from combat zones in all-terrain rides. In December 1943, General Lieutenant Friedrich Schultz, taken near Cassino, spoke with U.S. interrogators. Queried on American gear, he bluntly remarked that Nazi commanders held the Jeep in higher regard than any other U.S. invention. It was, according to him, the prize they coveted most for everyday deployment. Coming from a high-ranking German with broad battlefield exposure, this view flipped the scornful evaluations from early 1942. By early 1944, seized Jeeps had grown so valuable to German troops in Italy that dedicated directives emerged for their handling. Looted U.S. machines needed prominent German markings to avoid mishaps from Allied shots. Repair teams got specialized instruction in Jeep upkeep. Even though they guzzled more gas than Kubalverins, fuel rations for these captures took precedence. The logic was straightforward. One Jeep handled scouting tasks that demanded multiple German options. Thanks to its velocity, endurance, and off-road prowess, it outshone local alternatives regardless of thirstier engines. Squads using captured Jeeps noted sharp gains in battlefield agility. They pushed probes farther into Allied territory, advancing quicker and spanning wider areas than feasible with Kubel wagons. The all-wheel drive setup let them function amid conditions that stalled German rides. The intel gains were immense. A German scout group in a taken Jeep might blend as U.S. from afar, sneaking nearer to enemy spots undetected. The vehicle's sturdy build cut downtime on vital ops. Its straightforward engineering allowed basic technicians to handle on-site fixes. Operation Grief, amid the December 1944 Battle of the Bulge, offered the starkest proof of German craving for such captures. As Adolf Hitler tasked Otto Skorzeny with sabotage raids beyond American fronts, Skorzeny insisted on ample U.S. vehicles, especially Jeeps. The scheme hinged on Teutonic infiltrators and U.S. garb sowing chaos across lines. Skorzeny sought no fewer than 100 nabbed Jeeps. Logistics experts ransacked support zones and pinged all possible holders of U.S. prizes. They scraped up about 30, well short of the goal. The deficit pushed Scozzi to adapt, masking German autos as Yankee ones. Even under Hitler's direct endorsement and boundless power, mustering just 30 intact Jeeps highlighted their scarcity. Americans flooded fields with them, while Germans rarely snagged whole ones. Those saboteurs assigned captured Jeeps for Operation Graf deemed them exceptionally potent for sneaking in. Clad in U.S. outfits and piloting authentic American Jeeps, the Germans breached defenses and stirred major disarray in the Bulge's initial phase. U.S. sentries grew suspicious, grilling passers-by and quizzing on Yankee trivia. Nabbed operatives, under questioning, repeatedly lauded the Jeep's prowess. They highlighted how its pace enabled fast getaways, its agility dodged posts, and its commonality drew zero extra scrutiny. Though the mission flopped on the big scale, it showed how capably Germans wielded U.S. tools when afforded the chance. The Jeeps proved utterly dependable under German. The hands-on evidence indicated that any apparent weaknesses stemmed largely from shortages of fuel rather than flaws in design. The Allied assault on France in June 1944 flooded the battlefield with so many Jeeps that they left German troops in stunned disbelief. During Operation Overlord, roughly 20,000 Jeeps were deployed onto the beaches in the initial days of the campaign. Troops from Germany, holding the line in Normandy, confronted a U.S. force whose agility surpassed all prior experiences. Post-battle assessments from every German unit in Normandy highlighted the edge in American maneuverability. In contrast to German infantry formations, which depended mostly on horse-pulled wagons and featured just a small portion of motorized elements, U.S. divisions operated with complete mechanization. As a result, American troops moved with greater speed, assembled strength more swiftly, and reacted to dangers far more promptly than their opponents. At the heart of this superiority stood the Jeep, functioning as a reconnaissance vehicle, leadership transport, signal hub, armament hauler, medical evacuator, and all-purpose mover. Officers from Germany taken prisoner in Normandy repeatedly cited U.S. Jeeps as standout gear when questioned on rival strengths. Oberst Hans von Luck, who led a Panzer reconnaissance unit, recounted in his post-war account how he drove a seized American Jeep for weeks following the loss of his own ride. He deemed it better than German scouting machines in nearly all ways, save for its thirstier fuel use. The acute German petroleum crisis in France that summer rendered captured Jeeps progressively harder to run. Even intact captures by German squads proved challenging to sustain as gasoline stocks evaporated. Certain leaders directed that seized Jeeps serve solely for vital tasks to stretch limited reserves. Others left the prizes behind once fuel dried up entirely. This led to an ironic twist. German ranks craved American Jeeps desperately, yet frequently couldn't exploit them properly even after acquisition. A handful of German outfits with steady fuel lines, mainly elite SS Panzer divisions enjoying top priority rations, kept running captured Jeeps right through the 1944 summer months. Those groups noted the machine's ongoing excellence in scouting, offsetting the high fuel demands. The enhanced strategic reach and battlefield adaptability they offered made the extra consumption worthwhile. A detained SS commander confided to questioners that his outfit would swap 2 Kübelwagens for a single American Jeep, provided fuel existed to power it. A side-by-side evaluation of the Jeep against the Kübelwagen explains the fierce favoritism German personnel showed toward the U.S. model. The Kübelwagen tipped the scales at around 1,600 Liter, less than the Jeep's 2,000 Liter curb weight. It ran on an air-cooled power plant delivering 2312 horsepower at first, bumped to 25 horsepower by 1943, still shy of half the Jeep's 60 horsepower output. Consequently, the Kübelwagen managed only about 15 horsepower per ton in power-to-weight terms, compared to the Jeep's roughly 28 horsepower per ton. Such a gap translated to stark contrasts in capability. The Jeep surged ahead quicker, scaled inclines more aggressively, and held elevated velocities with ease. The Kübelwagen peaked at roughly 50 mph on pavement, but faltered in sustaining that pace away from trails. By contrast, the Jeep neared 55 mph at top end and sustained 40 mph over rugged ground. The disparity in drivetrains loomed even larger. The Kübelwagen stuck to rear-wheel propulsion, augmented by a locking differential and portal axle hubs for torque reduction. This innovative setup yielded impressive cross-country prowess under various scenarios. Its level undercarriage allowed the rig to glide past hurdles instead of snagging. In loose sand, deep snow, or sloppy mud, the Kübelwagen's featherweight build and smooth base occasionally edged out competitors. Yet, on sharp slopes, when surmounting barriers, or whenever peak grip was essential, the Jeep's all-four-wheel drive dominated. Distributing torque across all axles enabled the Jeep to conquer pitches and clear impediments that stumped the Kübelwagen. U.S. trials demonstrated Jeeps tackling 60% gradients under full payload. The Kübelwagen, meanwhile, strained to hit 30% slopes with comparable burdens. Durability emerged as a further key differentiator. On paper, the Kübelwagen's air-cooled mill promised straightforwardness and sturdiness, but its anemic output forced it to labor at full tilt in action, accelerating breakdown and breakdowns. The Jeep's beefier motor, by comparison, seldom pushed to its limits, easing wear and prolonging operational spans. Servicing leaned in the Jeep's favor, too. Though built for ease, the Kübelwagen suffered from the Jeep's uniform design, which ensured parts flowed abundantly. Mechanics in German service tinkering with Kübelwagens frequently endured delays for spares produced solely back home. U.S. Technicians servicing Jeeps merely pulled components from the closest warehouse, stocked with thousands of ready items. The sharpest insight arose from German first-hand accounts. Units from the Wehrmacht that utilized both types of transport overwhelmingly favored seized U.S. Jeeps when given the option and sufficient gasoline, opting for them rather than their native Kübelwagens. Evidence of this inclination surfaces in seized paperwork, debriefings from prisoners, and recollections penned by Wehrmacht leaders after the conflict who oversaw outfits equipped with each kind. Output figures underscore the sheer scale of U.S. manufacturing superiority. Between 1941 and 1945, Willys manufactured 361,339 mm Jeeps, while Ford assembled 278,896 GPW Jeeps, yielding a total surpassing 639,000 units crafted to the same standards. In stark contrast, Germany churned out precisely 50-35 Kübelwagens over the course of the war, resulting in the U.S. generating over 12-fold the number of quarter-ton transports compared to its adversary. The disparity tilts further toward American favor upon factoring in that about 30% of U.S. Jeep output was dispatched to fellow allies via the Lend-Lease program. Thousands went to Britain, tens of thousands to the Soviet Union, and the Free French armed themselves exclusively with American gear, encompassing thousands of Jeeps. Consequently, Wehrmacht troops encountered Jeeps not merely in clashes with U.S. forces, but also during battles against British, Russian, and French contingents. The Jeep's widespread adoption among all Allied armies yielded further benefits. When U.S., British, and Free French squads collaborated, they readily exchanged replacement components and repair assistance for their Jeeps. German units, however, grappled with a confusing assortment of lightweight transports from various producers, featuring incompatible spares. Uniformity went further than the machines alone. U.S. Armed Forces prepared technicians through consistent training programs, irrespective of their eventual deployment zone. A specialist schooled in Kansas proved equally adept at servicing Jeeps in Italy or across the Pacific. Instruction guides remained uniform everywhere, and component directories applied globally. Such consistency generated vast operational efficiencies, amplifying the impact of America's output prowess. Fabricating 600,000 uniform vehicles outpaced the strategic worth of 600,000 diverse ones. Logistics by itself warranted the uniformity. U.S. provisioning experts could forecast needs for spares, assured that all fielded Jeeps relied on the same pieces. Their German counterparts endured chaos in provisioning for scores of distinct transport models. The Jeep's multifunctionality outstripped the visions of German strategists for their scout vehicles. Beyond scouting and leadership duties, it filled myriad niche functions. Jeeps armed with machine guns functioned as swift firing units. The SAS in North Africa notoriously deployed Jeeps fitted with several machine guns to assault Luftwaffe bases, charging in at full throttle amid a hail of bullets. Altered Jeeps with cable snippers shielded operators from waist-high cables that Germans draped over paths to behead riders on bikes and Jeeps. Radio-outfitted Jeeps turned into roving command posts. Those with litters acted as speedy medical transports. Jeeps hauling compact trailers shuttled provisions ahead and casualties rearward. Versions with rail fittings traversed tracks where roadways lay in ruins. Engineering Jeeps hauled power units and fabrication gear. Spotters exploited Jeeps to dash swiftly among battery sites. Scout teams in Jeeps spanned vast terrains, yielding intel unattainable via sluggish alternatives. Parachute outfits crammed Jeeps into gliders, granting drop troops instant transport upon touchdown. Certain Jeeps received water-capable upgrades, although these proved less reliable than the core version. The core framework's pliability allowed squads to adapt Jeeps to particular tasks, employing on-hand materials and basic implements. A basic Jeep transformed into a gun carrier within hours via affixed welding for mounts. It shifted to medical duty in moments with added litter frames. Such versatility rendered the Jeep immensely useful amid dynamic warfare, where demands evolved swiftly. Though effective in intended capacities, German lightweight transports fell short on such versatility. The Kübelwagen excelled as a scout vehicle, yet resisted reconfiguration for alternate purposes. Its modest engine output caused any added load or gear to sharply impair handling. The Jeep's surplus power allowed it to bear extra gear, plating, or armaments without notable slowdowns. General Dwight Eisenhower, top Allied overseer in Europe, afterward singled out the Jeep among 5 key assets essential to triumphs in Africa and Europe. The remaining quartet consisted of the C-47 cargo plane, the 2.5-ton lorry, the bulldozer, and the DUKW waterland truck. Eisenhower observed that, intriguingly, none among these 5 pivotal elements qualified as frontline fighters. They stood as instruments for movement, supply chains, and cons. The Jeep's place on this elite roster, personally chosen by the Supreme Commander from America's full arsenal, underscored its pivotal role in the war effort. The sheer scale of manufacturing defies belief. During the height of output in 1944, total production topped 15,000 units each month, equaling about 500 daily. This feat demanded seamless synchronization among countless parts makers, as motors, gearboxes, wheels, and chassis sections arrived at factories right on schedule. Throughout the conflict, operations grew ever more streamlined. In 1941's initial runs, assembling one vehicle took far more labor hours than it did by 1944's end. Refinements in techniques, workflow enhancements, and mechanization progressively cut down the workforce needed per Jeep. Come 1944, the hours per unit had fallen by almost 40% from 1941 levels, all while output skyrocketed. Savings and expenses mirrored these productivity boosts. The first agreement in July 1941 pegged each Jeep at $738.74 per year. By 1944, refined methods brought the average down to roughly $600 apiece. Thus, the U.S. churned out Jeeps in greater numbers, at quicker paces, and lower prices as the fight wore on. A stark contrast to Germany's plight, where output waned, expenses climbed, and performance faltered amid Allied air assaults. In the war's closing year, 1945, the Wehrmacht lay in ruins. Scarcities of fuel and shells, plus the breakdown of supply chains, left captured U.S. gear largely useless to them. Discarded American machines clogged German highways during retreats. Still, in those chaotic final days, lone Wehrmacht troops hunted for seized Jeeps whenever they could. Individual transport held worth even as overall maneuvering failed. Officers relied on them to link up fractured commands. Enlisted men drove them to escape the oncoming Allies. From its 1942 dismissal as crude, the Jeep evolved into the prized possession for German forces by 1945. After the war, interviews with captured officers delivered the ultimate verdict. Queried on U.S. gear, Wehrmacht leaders repeatedly hailed the Jeep as one of America's standout innovations. A few deemed it more crucial than tanks or planes. Their logic aligned. Armored vehicles and flyers grabbed headlines with flair. Yet the Jeep underpinned the rest. It delivered the transport, adaptability, and support systems fueling U.S. campaigns. Raw combat power availed little without steady resupply. Cutting-edge maneuvers hinged on quick repositioning. More than any isolated tool, the Jeep captured U.S. strengths in industry and coordination. Its volume, uniformity, durability, and adaptability highlighted the American approach that Germany simply couldn't replicate. Major General Fritz Bayerlein, former head of the Panzer Division in Normandy, informed his post-war questioners that the U.S. Jeep ranked among the Allies' top 3 assets. The others, far-reaching fighters shielding bombing raids and the proximity-fused shells that shredded Luftwaffe planes. The Jeep earned its spot not through brute force or lethality, but by amplifying the impact of all other tools. The shift in German views on the American Jeep marks one of the conflict's sharpest turnarounds. Back in 1941 and 1942, analysts scorned it as basic and outclassed by German designs. Into 1943, frontline troops eagerly nabbed them. By 1944, dedicated repair teams learned to service seized models. And in 1945's downfall, as all else crumbled, rank-and-file Germans still lauded U.S. Jeeps over almost every rival item. This arc mirrors the larger conflict narrative. Germany launched the war brimming with faith in its engineering prowess and battlefield doctrines. Its machines, strategies, and fighters seemed unmatched globally. Initial triumphs bolstered that belief. But U.S. manufacturing might, managerial skill, and practical design ingenuity slowly eclipsed those edges. The Jeep symbolized it all. It wasn't the fanciest scout car. German designers could highlight the Kübelwagen's smarter touches, yet complexity yielded to sheer volume, dependability, and consistency. The U.S. produced Jeeps aplenty for any demanding role, serviced them with standard replacements, and adapted them to countless tasks. Frontline Germans grasped this truth before the brass did. Troops on the ground quickly realized that American troops benefited from superior mobility. German armies struggled to keep pace. They noticed how U.S. casualties arrived at medical facilities in less time. Provisions for American forces advanced with greater speed, and U.S. leaders adapted to evolving battlefield conditions more swiftly. A significant portion of this edge arose from ample supplies of Jeeps, turning swift movement into standard practice instead of a rarity. Upon seizing undamaged U.S. logistics sites, German officers discovered storage areas brimming with Jeep components. Reviewing American unit structures, they learned that even the tiniest formations received Jeep quotas. Watching U.S. maneuvers, they spotted Jeeps in abundance, handling diverse duties from transporting high-ranking officers to hauling cannons and removing injured soldiers. No counterpart to the Jeep's widespread presence existed in German ranks. Horse-drawn carts proved useful, yet limited in number. German lightweight transports were preserved meticulously and distributed solely to essential groups. In contrast, American Jeeps existed in such quantities that they appeared expendable. Formations that forfeited Jeeps through combat simply requested substitutes from depots overflowing with thousands of units. Such plenty fostered tactical adaptability. U.S. planners could devise campaigns relying on boundless transport options. German leaders, however, needed to allocate vehicles judiciously and avoid strategies demanding excess capacity beyond what they possessed. These limitations molded their operational choices. The Jeep's straightforward design allowed for swift fixes on many impaired units. U.S. repair policies prioritized on-site restorations backed by vast inventories of parts. Machines, too, wrecked for frontline mending were exchanged outright, bypassing delays for major facility work. Though this method demanded massive logistical networks, it ensured steady levels of combat preparedness. German policies focused on meticulous fixes and preservation amid vehicle shortages. Affected transports underwent repeated restorations and refurbishments, sustaining service but frequently at reduced efficiency. This core divergence in methods mirrored contrasting production strengths. The United States could produce transports with built-in extras, tolerate combat attrition, and sustain endless resupplies. Germany, facing production shortfalls, had to safeguard each asset since replacements proved unattainable. The Jeep's triumphs shaped global vehicle innovation after the conflict. All prominent armed services launched efforts to craft Jeep-like designs. The British Land Rover, Soviet Gaz 69, French Delahaye VLR, and numerous others drew straight from encounters with U.S. Jeeps in wartime. Even post-war partitioned Germany created its version upon establishing the Bundeswehr. The 1956 DKW Munga displayed evident Jeep traits in its configuration and functions. Japan, having opposed Jeep-outfitted Allied troops in the Pacific, crafted the Toyota Land Cruiser, informed partly by analysis of seized U.S. Jeeps. The consumer sector underwent even greater change. Willys spotted the Jeep's marketplace promise amid the war. By 1945, with wartime manufacturing tapering, Willys unveiled the CJ2A for public use. It kept the core military framework but included civilian-friendly additions, such as a rear door, side-mounted reserve wheel, and marginally plusher seats. Rural workers, livestock handlers, building firms, and adventure seekers adopted the civilian Jeep eagerly. It handled daily chores like dragging agricultural tools, then doubled as everyday family transport. It reached isolated work areas or remote outposts beyond the reach of typical cars. Priced at $190, it seemed costly for the era, yet its adaptability warranted the expense. Demand proved robust, prompting Willys to evolve civilian Jeep lines further. The 1949 CJ3A incorporated a single-piece front glass. The 1955 CJ5 emerged as one of history's most enduring models, lasting in production for 31 years. The public Jeep sector expanded gradually across the 1950s and 1960s, then surged in the 1970s with the rise of leisure-oriented off-road machines. The Jeep marque shifted among owners from Willys to Kaiser to American Motors to Chrysler. Successive stewards valued the brand's legacy and roots. Today's Jeeps, including the Wrangler, intentionally recall the 1941 MB's look with upright grille bars and visible latches. The unbroken progression from that initial wartime Jeep to contemporary sport utility vehicles marks a standout achievement in vehicle lineage. Jeep now sells over 1 million units yearly around the world. A simple 1941 call for a compact scouting vehicle birthed a whole class of machines, yielding billions in revenue each year. Insights from German handling of seized U.S. Jeeps carry implications wider than mere mechanical design. Advanced gear alone accomplishes little. Lacking the necessary backing systems, the Kübelwagen represented smart design ingenuity. Yet, ingenuity alone couldn't make up for constrained output, rare replacement components, and inadequate fuel resources. The Jeep triumphed not through being the pinnacle of technical refinement, but by being sufficiently capable and manufactured in vast numbers, backed by robust supply chains. Uniformity turned out to be far more crucial than fine-tuning. Instead of crafting diverse models tailored to particular functions, the U.S. focused on a single versatile platform that could handle numerous duties. Such an approach yielded huge gains in manufacturing efficiency, upkeep, personnel preparation, and supply management, far surpassing any edges gained from purpose-built machines. High-volume assembly demanded shifts in design thinking. German designs typically incorporated precise fits and meticulous craftsmanship, delivering top-notch results right out of the factory, but complicating on-site repairs and necessitating custom components. In contrast, U.S. vehicles like the Jeep used broader clearances and straightforward builds. This led to minor dips in raw capability, but boosted dependability and ease of service immensely. Overall manufacturing power eclipsed the excellence of any single piece of gear. While German tanks, planes, and rifles frequently outshone their American counterparts in craftsmanship, such superior items couldn't bridge the enormous gaps in sheer volume. During the conflict, America produced 643,000 Jeeps. Germany managed only 50,000 Kübelwagens. That 12-1 disparity captured the bigger picture of wartime strategy. Preparation methods and operational principles amplified the strengths of available hardware. U.S. troops underwent thorough instruction in vehicle care and adopted strategies centered on rapid movement, allowing them to squeeze the utmost potential from their mobility assets. Meanwhile, German units shaped by foot soldier-focused approaches in an outfit that depended substantially on equine conveyance, at times underutilized their own motorized assets. Views and actual outcomes often clashed sharply. Early German evaluations brushed off the Jeep after quick inspections. Battlefield encounters exposed the vast chasm between expected limits and real-world prowess. Groups depending on armchair evaluations over hands-on trials court dangerous errors. Supply networks shape what strategies can actually unfold. Access to replacements, petroleum, and repair aid frequently outweighed specs on paper. German outfits occasionally held better gear that became dead weight due to support breakdowns. U.S. supply lines kept Jeeps running no matter the terrain or fight's ferocity. The mockery ended in Tunisia. Come May 1943, with German troops capitulating in North Africa, scornful quips about U.S. ingenuity vanished from Wehrmacht dispatches, giving way to pleas for seized American rides and reluctant nods to the success of Yankee tactics. This shift highlights the larger narrative of how U.S. factory strength slowly crushed early Axis edges. The Jeep embodied that dynamic not via complexity, but through sheer output, toughness, and uniformity, scaled up over hundreds of thousands of units. General George Marshall's verdict rang true in foresight. The Jeep truly stood as America's top gift to contemporary combat, not the mightiest arm, but the foundation for all other efforts. The Willys MB and Ford GPW endured loyally into Korea, and further, though their legacy stretched past active duty, showing how churning out uniform gear with streamlined support could tip the scales in armed struggles and underscoring that factory output itself counts as martial strength. The Axis troops who scoffed at the Jeep back in 1941 had misjudged U.S. productive force. By 1943, they sought to seize them. By 1945, they grasped that the Jeep symbolized the full scope of American strength they had never comprehended. The Jeep traversed any ground, tackled any job, and persisted exactly as the U.S. had intended.